More and more coaches are inundating the market, and it's getting harder to distinguish yourself as a coach. So, how do you plant your flag as an authority? How does one produce content that will build a following? Erik Jensen explains specifically the strategy to build an audience and how to convert leads into clients. Welcome to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katrina Burrus, and today we're going to be interviewing Erik Jensen. Now, he is co-owner of Predictive ROI, an agency helping business coaches develop and monetize their position of authority. So, Erik, most welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Katrina. I am happy to be here.
So, yes, let's get to all our listeners your good advice on how to monetize and be recognized as an authority in their industry.
Yeah, so Predictive ROI, which is my company, we really focus on helping agencies, coaches, and consultants build a position of thought leadership and monetize it. Mm-hmm.
So how do you help people be recognized as an authority in their industry?
Oh, man. So there's a lot of different tactical pieces to that. So instead, where I'll start is maybe a little bit of the 50,000 foot view first of really what an authority means. So there are 10 truths to authority. I'm not going to run through all of those now. We have a book that outlines all that stuff. But really the main ones that we see people struggle with when it comes to positions of authority is that they try too much to be something to everyone. So they're not actually niche down in who they serve, how they serve, and why they serve. And so they look like a generalist to everybody else. So it's a little bit like if you are going to go to, if you have a heart condition, do you go to a general practitioner or do you go to a heart surgeon, right? Most people naturally would lean towards the heart surgeon because that's their authority. They're niched down and they help really solve a very, very specific problem.
So great. So, okay, you got a niche, know who you're targeting and why you're targeting and what you can bring to them. So what type of content do you advise? Give me an example of one of your clients that is niched down and which type of content they should be creating.
Great. Okay, so when you're niche down, the type of content can be very variable depending on what your audience really wants to consume. So there are some audiences that like to consume a different type of media than others, but let's just go with a general view of I'm trying to reach, let's say, all I want to reach is agencies. So that's one of our target audiences, right? Is I want to focus on agencies. We have a client that does the same.
Yeah.
His name is Drew McClellan. He runs Agency Management Institute, and he's brilliant. He's really, really good at being able to help agency owners. And so the platform that worked for him really well was actually having a podcast, very similar to yours. And what he does is he takes that podcast and we help him not only produce that, find the right people to be on there, but then we actually take that and slice and dice that cornerstone content into all of the other pieces that are necessary to reach his audience, whether that's social media, email, blogs, things along those lines. And really the sky's the limit depending on what you choose as far as your initial content. So before we started the recording, Katrina, you and I were talking about the upcoming work that you're going to be doing and exploring some potential stuff with video. And boy, that's awesome, right? So video is the highest context that you can produce. It's easy to slice and dice that into just audio. You pull the audio out. There you go. You can use that. You can then take the audio. You can get a transcript. Awesome. Now it's ready to be written. But the whole goal of a good content strategy for authority is that it's getting it out of your head, the authority's head, and getting it down where other people can transform it. Okay. So if it always remains in your head as the authority, your ability to leverage your time and your smarts quickly diminishes. But if you can get it out of your head and into some other platform and some other medium, then what you can do is you can create a process, you can get a team behind you, and you can really proliferate off of everything that you do.
Okay. So I'm going to give you my specific example so to see how you would apply it for
Great.
our listeners. Okay. But a lot of our listeners are coaches. Our podcast is called Excellent Executive Coaching. So I'm a coach for leaders, and my niche market is twofold, which of course you'll say you should only have one. I agree. But I manage brilliant jerks. So I transform brilliant jerks into inspiring leaders. Okay, that's one. And the other is, since I've had a multicultural environment and worked in different countries and with different types of companies, I help onboard leaders across borders. Okay? Okay. Let's stay with the managing brilliant jerks. Okay.
All right.
Okay. So my target is both, it's always corporations, the companies call me in. So what's the kind of advice would you give, for example?
Oh, okay. And I'll just ask a couple of other clarifying questions.
Sure.
Because I think that this is helpful. And I love running through this sort of stuff. Okay. So for you, the decision makers that you're ultimately trying to talk to, are they in the C-suite of these organizations?
Yes, C-suite. Okay. Exactly. And the client is in the C-suite.
And the client is in the C-suite. Okay. And ultimately, for you, in your experience, and again, I might be wrong here, but this is typical for coaches. If you're able to start to develop a relationship with someone, your chances of being able to turn them into a client go up significantly versus, you just doing cold calls, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. So here's an example of a content strategy that we would recommend in your particular situation. So this particular strategy, we call it the Trojan horse of sales. And what you would do is you would start by identifying the 25 dream prospects, dream companies that you'd like to be able to work with, right? And have clients from. And the reason we say the dream 25 is because not all clients are created equal. There are some clients that aren't going to be a good fit for you. There are some clients that just aren't going to be able to bring in the revenue that you need. There are some clients that are going to be outside of your sweet spot or your niche, right? And this strategy does get easier if you were to narrow down the industry that these particular companies are in, right?
This is great because all the listeners can do this as we talk. So
Right.
25 dream prospects and narrow it down into the industry you want to target.
Right. And the reason they say that is because it's much easier to target for an industry rather than, well, I want to work with all these businesses. These businesses should, or these clients should represent, up to 10% of your revenue, right? So they're not small, like there's someone that you're willing to invest in. And one of the questions we love to ask is when someone is on a Dream 25, we'll say, okay, would you spend $1,000 to develop that relationship? Are you that dedicated to developing this relationship? Do you think it brings that much to the table for your company? And do you feel that confident that you can do amazing work for them, that you would spend $1,000 to develop the relationship with that person?
Great.
The answer is no. They probably shouldn't be on your Dream 25.
So let's say you say yes, absolutely.
Yes. Oh, perfect. All right. So you've got this list of 25. So
Yes.
then what I would do is I would say, okay, Dr. Katrina, you have this wonderful vehicle, your podcast, for creating content. What would it look like if you were to invite those Dream 25 folks to be guests on your podcast? Right?
Yes, right.
It wouldn't be a sales call. You wouldn't be cold calling them. Instead, you would be saying, hey, potential client, I really like the work that you're doing in this way, in this way, in this way in your company. I think you guys are doing some amazing things. Well, now you've already demonstrated that you actually know who they are and what they're doing. Already a good start. I have an audience of people that are interested in learning more about that. Okay, well, now you've demonstrated that you're actually bringing value to the table for them. And say, I would love to be able to have you on the podcast to be able to discuss X, Y, and Z. Your chances of having them say yes are significantly higher than if you were to get a hold of someone and say, hey, I'd love to have coffee sometime. Or I'd love to talk to you about how I can help your business. Or any of the other myriad ways that you can start a sales conversation, right? Instead, what you're doing is you're taking the content machine that you've already built, right? Your podcast, and you're leveraging your time to be able to open up doors that you know you want to open up anyway. These are conversations and relationships you want to develop anyway. So
Right.
why not make that helpful for them, helpful for you, and helpful for your audience all at the same time and leverage all the time that you're investing in it?
I see. Very great advice. So basically, target your dream clients, ask them, first of all, research them, what they're
Yes.
doing, highlight something they're doing that you think is good, and then say you have an audience that would be interested in that, and that might be of interest to the company. Would the company also be interested in the amount of downloads that podcast can give? Or it's really, they're also niche markets. So it would have to be
Right.
a market that interests them.
So you're hitting the nail on the head here. So if you're a generalist and your audience is general, then the number of downloads doesn't, in fact, matter. If you're a specialist and your audience really matters to the folks that you're talking with, then no, actually, it really doesn't matter because they're just excited to be able to be talking to the right people in the right context with somebody who has authority and sway and positioning with that audience. And one of the things I do want to address is for any of your listeners that are going, oh, I don't have a podcast. I don't have time to do that. I don't want to do that. That's fine. The Trojan horse strategy doesn't necessarily rely on you having a podcast. I think podcasts are a great vehicle to be able to do this with, but they're not the only vehicle. You could do the same idea with anything that allows you to have a sit down conversation. So we help our clients do this through primary research, where they're actually talking with folks and interviewing them. We help our clients do this with video series where they're having short conversations and they're putting it out on YouTube. We help our clients do this for a blog series where, they're talking to folks in order to be able to get great content for their blogs. And again, this is all content that if you want to be seen as an authority, you have to be putting out your thoughts. You have to be teaching. You have to be relentlessly helpful if you want to be an authority. So all we're suggesting with this particular strategy is why not take those activities you know you have to be doing anyway, and you probably are doing anyway, and combine them with other activities that you know you have to be doing anyway, and you probably are doing anyway, and get two birds with one stone.
So combining information, I'll give one question. And also just to finish with the podcast before I ask the second question. So, okay, let's say you have a leadership podcast. A lot of people want to access leadership. What would be the interest of another leader to learn about their competitor or a leader from a different company? Would that be at all an interest? Or is it a leader would be interested in being on a podcast if he knows he's in the health industry and the podcast is addressed to the health industry?
Yeah. So most people are interested in learning. So if I'm a leader, I'm probably interested in improving my leadership. So that is viable. But your second example is really where you start to get good traction. So if your audience is really, let's say those within health and wellness. In fact, I'm going to even go more specific. Let's say your audience is chiropractors, right? You coach chiropractors on how to run more effective businesses. Awesome. So the sorts of people that you would want to aim for in your Dream 25 then could be chiropractors who are doing amazing things within their own practice. Okay, fantastic. Your audience wants to learn from that. And by the way, you also want to have a conversation with them because they could be a potential client for you, right?
Yeah.
Or someone who's doing something innovative within the chiropractic industry, or someone who is just at the very beginning stages of opening a practice. And you're like, I want to get inside the mind and be able to help our audience who is just going down that path, what it looks like, or maybe someone who's stepping out from one practice and founding their own. And they were working before with someone else. All those become really viable interviewees to have on whatever platform you choose to have on. In this case, we're talking about a podcast. And in addition, you start to open up some more advanced strategies when you get that niched. Okay. And we can talk through some of those opportunities, but what I will say is Now your Dream 25 can also start to include what we would consider to be peanut butter and jelly relationships, complementary and non-competitive. So you could easily have on someone who is a specialist in, let's say, finance and accounting for chiropractors. They wouldn't be a direct person that's going to become a client for you, but if that's all they do, they have the same audience that you want to reach. They're helping the same sort of folks. It's really helpful to your audience to have them in front of them. And you can probably go in front of their audience and be really helpful too. And so you can start fishing in other ponds in order to be able to expand your reach.
So if we transfer this to coaches, there's coaches as a generic term. So there'd be health coaches, there'll be life coaches for divorces, or there would be executive coaches for, well, in my case, I'm an executive coach for leaders that are very, very bright experts, but interpersonally blind. So it's to get to that degree of specificity. I can't even say the word.
Yeah, right. The more focused you are, the easier it all becomes.
Yes. And then you mentioned also earlier that having a blog and transforming it. So maybe people don't have a podcast, but they might be blogging. So what's your advice there?
Yeah. So when we think about cornerstone content, and I'll give an example, or I'll describe what I mean by that. Cornerstone content is something that is regular, right? You're putting it out on a consistent basis, and it is aimed at that target audience relentlessly, right? So it's regular in the fact that they know that they can rely on when it's going to be there. They can also rely on it being helpful for a certain segment. It is meaty. So it's something that is significant enough that you can slice and dice it into smaller pieces, okay? And it's not a one-trick pony. So cornerstone content, when we say it can't be a one-trick pony, it can't live only one place. So imagine if you're a coach and you built up your entire coaching business by building a group on Facebook. And what if Facebook decided that they were closing down your group? What happens to your business? Right? It goes away. So if all of your content lived on Facebook and had to be created in Facebook and only served its purpose in Facebook, if that ever went away, you'd be sunk. So cornerstone content has to be something that's regular. It's got to be meaty enough to slice and dice, and it can't be a one-trick pony. So let's use your example of the blog. If you're doing it regularly, and I do say if we all know lots of business owners. Maybe we're that business owner ourselves who puts out their monthly blog post, twice a year, right? Or they do their weekly newsletter every 3 months. So if you're doing it regularly, that's good. That's a big, big start. With blogs, you need to be a little bit more prolific, and you need to be putting out, good, solid content, probably 2 or 3 times a week, typically. Doesn't all have to be from your head, but it has to be good, solid content. And then that content has to be meaty enough to slice and dice. And this is where the magic starts to happen. So what you do is you develop a process for how you want to write that content. And I'll give an example here really quick. So if we start off the first paragraph of the blog, we always write it in such a way that we could literally take it and we could turn it into a social media post. Fantastic. And then we pull out a golden nugget, a really insightful bit of data, maybe a controversial statement, a fantastic quote, whether that's from ourselves, from research, or from the Dream 25 that we talked about earlier, right, that you're having conversations with. You take that great golden nugget and it's like, okay, well, that becomes a great social media image. That becomes an image in the blog post. That becomes the hook that you can hang your hat on in order to be able to open an email and start an email about this latest blog post. And then you start going into the next part, which is the paragraphs that follow. And you can design those paragraphs. So again, maybe the second half of paragraph 1 actually goes in and basically writes your email for you. So you can take even something as simple as a blog, and you can really leverage it a whole lot more than having to stare at the blank cursor for 5 different platforms. Instead, create it once with all of those end uses in mind, and then it's ready to go. It's ready to proliferate. It's ready to get you out in front of the world in a whole bunch of different ways. And if you already have existing blog posts, That's okay, right? Maybe you can tweak those. Maybe you can modify those to be able to take advantage of these tactics. Or you can just say, you know what, moving forward for the blogs that I'm writing, I'm going to keep this stuff in mind. I'm going to have a process in place and I make sure I fire to that process every time.
So from the blog, you start it in a certain way, you mentioned. In what way do you make it specifically entertaining for a lot of different distribution networks?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot to be said for, again, I'm not necessarily saying you're going to be able to lift it perfectly, one for one, right? That might not be the case, but a lot of times it gets it, 90% of the way there.
Yes.
And here's the cool thing
Yes.
is if you're doing that now, if you've got that process down, you can actually start to train a team behind you, whether that's freelance writers or someone that you've got on staff to be able to follow this process the same way as you do. And that means all of that writing is going to be consistent and firing to the same target every time.
Wonderful advice. So that's a lot of work. It's a team behind it. It's consistency. It's dedication. So
Yes.
Tell us now, how can these coaches turn this content that's being distributed into leads and clients?
Great. So whenever you're putting out information that is helpful, you're already more welcomed in to people's inboxes, into their lives, into their days. And so what you can do is you can take those pieces and you can, again, start to turn them into what we call screaming cool value exchanges. Okay. So we use that term specifically because I don't even know how many clients we've worked with, and we go to their website and their value exchange to grow their list is, would you like to sign up for my newsletter? That's a horrible value exchange. I mean, I don't know about you, Katrina, but how often are you like, man, I am excited to get another newsletter in my inbox?
No.
Right?
I've just deleted most of them. The
Right.
listed.
And that's what most people do. So they're not really, they might drive traffic to their website with all this great content. They might have lots of people following them on social media platforms and listening to their podcast. But then what they do is they drop the ball on why someone would ever exchange their contact information for something that you have. Now, the great thing is you've been creating this sort of content, you've been interviewing these really smart people, you've been developing this discipline and this regimen of thinking deeply about a very narrow topic. What you can do is you can start to combine some of that stuff into frameworks. Now, that could be something as simple as ebooks. That could be something as complex as an actual book. I will tell you from our own personal experience, one of the books that we wrote, Profitable Podcasting, that was written half from podcast interviews. We just took the podcast interviews, we transcribed the pieces that were really brilliant from episodes that were relevant to it, and that wrote about half the book. And we help clients do that on a regular basis as well, is take their cornerstone content and turn it into something like a book. Or it could be mini courses, or it could be a full membership area. It could be guides and checklists. There's lots of different ways to be able to transform that content once you have it and you can combine it in really creative ways. That makes for a really good screaming cool value exchange where someone goes, oh, of course I want that thing. You've been relentlessly helpful to me. Every time I turn around, you're showing me stuff that makes me better at my job or solves problems for me. And then you're offering me this even cooler way of being able to do this in exchange for my email address. Fantastic. Now I can convert someone from an unknown entity, right? Somebody who might just be lurking on your website or lurking and listening to your podcast into someone that's on your list. And so that can make a really big difference. And then you can start to move them down the sales funnel because you actually know what they care about. So that's one method as far as how to be able to take your content and help it turn into actual leads. But the other one, I want to go back to the Dream 25 piece. And this is one that we get really excited about. This is one that we really encourage a lot of our clients to try to enact. And that is, if you've had someone on, let's say, Katrina, you interviewed someone that would be a fantastic client for you to have. Okay. You had a great conversation with them on the podcast. What next? right? Do you just hope that that person gets a hold of you again? Do you have them back for more episodes on the podcast? Do you just email them and say, hey, do you want to work with me? Right? So what we encourage instead is putting a system behind that. So if your Dream 25 comes onto your podcast, you interview them. And at the end of that interview, you go, yep, I still really want to work with them. I think I could do great work for them and they would be a great client for me. Then what you do is you'd move them into what we call a FERB system, which is a follow-up and relationship building system. And it is 8 to 9 steps of predetermined outreach that you're going to start doing for this person. You're going to be able to get a hold of them and say, hey, I was thinking about our podcast episode and it made me think of you when I was reading this particular book. Now, I'm not going to give you I'm not going to just say read the whole book. I'm going to say, specifically, I think you should check out chapter 7, page 82, because that really talks about what it is that we mentioned on the podcast. And I think it would be really helpful to you, right? Goes along with a handwritten note, everything along those lines. And you do these sorts of steps, like I said, 8 or 9 times. And at the end of that, now when you say, hey, I was re-listening to that episode and you talk about XYZ. My company does XYZ really, really well. And I think we could help you with that. Would you have time for a call? 9 times out of 10, the answer is yes. And we know because we've tested this a bunch. And what it is you put so much into the bank throughout this whole process of relationship building that by the time you actually get to the sale, the conversation to have the sale, it feels natural. It feels good. It feels like that you've put in what you need to know that person, their company, their pain points, and that they're excited to have that conversation with you. They don't have walls up. They don't have doors locked. And you're able to have a really constructive sales conversation with them that doesn't feel self-serving.
Wonderful. We've come to the end of our podcast. Where can people get a hold of you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So probably the best way, if you really want to get to meet us and learn, is we have a weekly free Q&A. People hop on. There's usually about 15, 20 of us. And we teach for 10 minutes. And then we open it up to questions for anybody that wants to be able to put a problem out to the brain trust, so to speak. So I love doing those. So you can just hop over to our website, predictiveroi.com, and it's right there in the banner is to join the Q&As and register. Also, if anybody really is interested in diving into developing a position of authority, I'd really recommend, we have a book. It's called Sell with Authority. You can go to predictiveroi.com/free-book, and you can just get it for free. We will send you a copy for free. It's not one of those where you can sign up and then, by the way, we're going to charge you for shipping and handling or anything like that. It's just a free book because running a business is hard enough. And if we can help in any way, we like to be able to do so. We remember the struggle.
Okay, and this will be in the show notes so that you'll have of course, the webpage and where you can get this free book. I want to thank you very, very much. This is most interesting, Erik.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Dr. Katrina, for having me on. And hopefully this was helpful to your listeners.
I'm sure it will be. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
We would love to know what you thought of this podcast. Write us an email at drkatrina with a K at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. We would love to hear what you liked and what we could improve. This podcast has been sponsored by excellentexecutivecoaching.com.
Thank you for listening to the Excellent Executive Coaching Podcast. You can subscribe to all future podcasts at excellentexecutivecoaching.com. Join us each Wednesday to learn more about the latest trends in leadership techniques and bring your coaching to the next level. To learn more about Dr. Burrus' CEO Mastermind, use the contact form at excellentexecutivecoaching.com.